Welcome to the fourth segment of the Procurement Reset Roundtable. In this segment, we will hear from the panel leaders what they suggest are the various steps that can be taken to reduce volatility in supplier relations and optimize risk management. So next, I'd like to ask Paul, how have been your views on what are the steps procurement and supply chain leaders take for reducing volatility in supplier relationship to optimizing risk management associated with demand and supply networks or enhancing vendor segmentations, maybe in the telecom communications industry?
That's a big question. Thank you, Christopher.
What I'm here for.
So, no worries. I'm going to defer from my current role simply because we're in the middle of a whole bunch of regulatory things. So I don't really want to comment on the telecom space itself. But I do have, prior to joining Shaw, more than 20 years of global manufacturing, network technologies. So I can speak to some of those challenges a little bit different. What I'm seeing with let's be honest, since COVID, plus all the different political issues that have occurred between tariffs and major superpowers fighting and creating a whole bunch of other problems, the world today in a supply chain and manufacturing is truly. It's amazing how we're resorting more to who has the relationships that's actually driving. And when I look at the technology pieces of it, it's the technology is enabling the conversation effectively by knowing it allows leaders to understand more what they need to know in real time, as opposed to being the reliance and the technology is going to pull them through it. It's more about the companies that I'm seeing succeeding today and getting through all the volatility that's actually are the ones who understand where the raw materials are coming from, who has what relationships, who has the relationships with the distributors or the brokers, because there's such basically all excess components and raw materials have basically been either hoarded now or more consumed. So it's really who has the relationship to get to what it is people are looking for, if that makes a bit more sense to you.
Yeah, Paul, fascinating view, and I would agree that it's kind of the Easter egg hunt all the way through the different nodes of the supply chain to kind of find the prize, right? Is the game we play these days. So thank you very much. I'd like to come back to Stephen and ask the same question, but more from a view of, kind of the consumer, perspective, that you're in the hospitality industry, especially when we talk about we as we as people coming in and wanting that superior guest experience. How do you answer the same question from your industry's perspective?
Yeah, I would just say a couple things, some of which I think has been touched on a bit earlier, but we have got to one, um, sort of ensure that we've got the right balance of ensuring resiliency in the supply chain. We spent so long driving efficiency in our supply chains in ways that would deliver financial value. But as I think everybody recognizes, COVID has stressed our supply chains greatly. And so we've got to make sure that we are ensuring the resiliency so that the things that we absolutely have to have, right, from an availability standpoint, are where we need them to be when we need them to be there, right? So that resiliency, I think, is incredibly important. I think we've got to be continue to be much more proactive about our forecasting and our demand, right? We can't cede that to manufacturers and to distributors, right? We've got to play a much more proactive role in that to ensure that, to someone's earlier point, linens, right, are in the hotels when we need them, toilet paper, food and beverage items, et cetera, right? All the things that are critical just to a fundamental, reasonable guest experience that are table stakes that we cannot go without those in terms of delivering on the guest experience. And then I think for us, if we think about how we better leverage technology, how do we, from an industry perspective, take away some of the tactical activities that either our front desk and or other personnel might oftentimes get dragged into, and create what some of our executives call above property solutions that allow our staff to really deliver on a superior guest experience that make people say, I want to come back to this place as a part of a place that I choose to travel when I do in fact travel again. So those are some of the things I would suggest are important as we try to make sure that we mitigate the risk associated with supply chain disruptions.
Thanks, Stephen. Great insight. I would assume also that the consideration of safety, both of the staff and the guests, is something that we have to now consider paramount in all of our activities. So thank you very much. I'd like to go to Purvi next and ask her to shed some light on the various parameters that are taken in consideration while making sure that there are minimal business volatilities in supplier relationships and optimizing risk management if we talk from a retail and consumer good organization perspective.
Yeah. So, I would honestly say, optimizing risk. I think we have a ton of products and solutions out there that really do help us understand the risk. I think going back to some of the panelists' points previously, right, where we haven't really made a lot of investments in the procurement sourcing functions to really enable that to be good or as effective we want it to be, right? So I think the good news on the risk side is we have a ton of tools and capabilities, right? We just as organizations need to just make sure we're leveraging that. I think in terms of having, I think one of the things I look at it and say, how do we sort of do things differently? Very similar to Stephen and the team brought up is, right, it really is about customer experience. But when I look at customer, it's not just the end user customer. Certainly that's a paramount. We need to make sure that that's there. But we also have to look at and say, what's our experiences, right, of our own stakeholders who are also our internal customers, right? How do we drive and enable some of change in order for us to get to the new place, right, where we want to go to, as a function or as leaders of the function, right? And when I look at some of those components, all of these things we talked about, AI, all of these come into play. We have to be open to adapt and change. I think that's paramount. I think leaders at every level of the organization, right, every person should be really thinking about how do we drive the change so we can bring agility and velocity to the business needs, right? Because there's so many new challenges that in fact, I know I haven't experienced over my career, right? All at the same time, right? We're used to a few things here and there, but this is just something completely different. And we have to think outside of the box, right? We can't assume everything is correct and that this is how we did it. I think we've got to get past that mentality, and we have to help our teams get past that mentality. I think if we can get to that, we can really be well positioned to support the business, from addressing all these other macro issues they're experiencing that are much more bigger than, we're here to support them on.
Yeah, thanks very much, Purvi. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that balance of velocity and kind of technology is kind of the key to everything to make sure that we can kind of get that. Next, I'd like to go to Don. The emerging and most promising company in digital linens. How do you believe that a startup ecosystem that where procurement steps and supply chain sourcing leaders would like to take in reducing volatility and supplier relations and optimize risk? So, in other words, how would you address it for your organization in that kind of startup phase?
Yeah, I think from the startup phase, first of all, I think what everyone is saying here, and as a visionary in this space, I mean, we're all preparing ourselves for a third generation of software that's, built around artificial intelligence and IoT. And so, specifically from us, I think that it makes it more important from the technical side to be able to access data more important than ever. And so with the advent of being able to understand things, connecting those things, collecting information from those things, learning from those things, and taking those actionable results that we discussed, you will get to a point where I think you're going to uncover a lot more data points and have more perspective than you've had before. And I think that's what we've been doing as a startup, is preparing for that third generation and what's going to be coming about. in the future, so that we could provide, a single source solution from service all the way to replenishment.
Great. Thanks, Don, Purvi, and Stephen and Paul for sharing your interesting viewpoints and insights on the various structural changes that procurement and supply side sourcing goes through, and how it becomes important to maximize risk management in a best business continuity, especially with velocity and the pandemic and in perspective. So thank you.